Hello, my name is Hayden, and with my partner Xuan, today we will be learning about the axial skeleton, the pectoral girdle, and the pelvic girdle of a shark, a mud puppy, and a cat. From comparing these structures with each animal, we will relate it with each other to compare their anatomy. We will also then talk about how these animals in their fins or limbs compared to the important transitional piece Tiktaalik, as I mentioned, an important transitional vertebrate.
As we know, cranium and vertebra are two major elements in vertebrate animals, and both the bones of the head and trunk of a vertebrate form the exoskeleton. The exoskeleton is a major topic in Module 4 lab. However, they are very different in each group or class of the vertebrate. Roughly, vertebrates can be divided into fish and tetrapod, and the cranium structures kind of similar between each other, but the vertebrates quite different in function and structure. First of all, the fish includes bony fish like perch and chondrichthyes like dogfish shark. They have trunk and caudal regions only, and their trunks skeletons are both amphicoelous, which means that the central part of each vertebra, akia the centrum, is concave on both anterior and posterior. Also, a big difference between fish and other vertebrates is that the fish centrum is hollow in the center within the notochord, while others not. The regional differentiation is related to the mode of locomotion. As fishes live in the freshwater and the sea, we can see that they are aquatic. The most important locomotion for them is swimming. The sharks all have cartilages, which are kind of bones that are not strong enough, that they rely on tails more as they propel self with tail, move their bodies from side to side, and stiffen tail mid-swimming. But in a bony swimming fish, it uses its skeleton for framework, its muscles for power, it's up to 80%, and its fins for thrust and direction. The skull is a relatively stable part of the bony fish, and it acts as a fulcrum, and the vertebral column acts as a lever that operates for the movement of the fish. There are three forces named thrust, lift, and drag. The thrust towards the front, and the lift for lateral direction. The last, the drag, is to the opposite the direction of movement. And when the thrust is higher or larger than the drag, we call it the fish is swimming. In tetrapod, the biggest differences from fish is that the notochord is completely replaced by a bony centrum. The amphibian is kind of a transition between the water vertebrate and land vertebrates. The specific regions of the exoskeleton in amphibian have the cenacle vertebrate, trunk vertebrate, sacral vertebrate, and caudal vertebrate. They have amphicoelos, for example the apodens, the procoelos like frogs, and opiscoelos like salamanders, the mud puppy. There are four processes in vertebrate development, which are: the first is vertebra form central, second, the closer association of spine to pectoral and pelvic girdles, third, the intervertebral joints appear, and the last is vertebral processes. All these new characters support the locomotion on land where has less air dance, more gravity influence on spine, and less resistant to movement. The larvae of amphibians swim more using muscles in the tails, while the adults can swim, jump, crawl to supported by exoskeletons as they alternating between extension and flexion. The adult locomotion depends on where their habitats are, and in addition, the intervertebral joints in the amphibians limit the range of motion. And other three classes are all amniote, with higher developed exoskeleton compared to amphibian. Their specific regions of the exoskeleton include cervical vertebrate, thoracic vertebrate, lumbar vertebrate, sacral vertebrate, and caudal vertebrate. Among them, the thoracic and lumbar, which grow from trunk vertebrate, are specific in amniote. Type of central in reptile can be amphicelos like the glass snake, the pearl-celos, and most other snakes. And most aves have heterocelos central, the vertebra having saddle-shaped articular surfaces. Besides, the mammals are acelos, which the ends of centrum are flat, and the vertebrae are separated by an intervertebral disc, the joints. Most reptiles can walk, crawl, and sometimes swim. For example, the crocodile can walk and crawl on land and sometimes swim in water. Most aves have their lightweight skeleton made of thin and hollow bones. Thus, they can fly through the muscles, wings, and the feathers. Of course, they can also walk on land. And some species, like duck, can even swim in water. Thus, the locomotion in the mammals is also very complex. The dolphins can swim in the sea, humans can walk on land, and bats can fly. All this locomotion are supported by the extension and flexion of exoskeletons. The next part talks about the pectoral girdle and fin elements of a shark. The pectoral girdle, consisting of a U-shaped complex, often called scapulocoracoid bar, lies just posterior to the last gill slit, and the ventral position of the U is the coracoid bar. The dorsal distal part is the scapular cartilages, and a dorsal lateral smooth surface, the glenoid surface, is present on the scapular cartilage to accommodate articulation of the pectoral fin, and a small attenuated medially curved structure, the suprascapular cartilage, cartilages dorsally with the scapular cartilage, completing the U-shaped structure. And the paired pectoral fins articulate with the specular cartilages. The proximal end is supported by a series of three basal pterygophores, an anterior protopterygian, a middle mesopterygian, and the posterior metapterygian. Also, the basal cartilages are rows of radial pterygophores, forming the major support of the fins. In this fin web, we can notice numerous fin rays. Last, we're going to talk about the transition from fish to amphibians and to the mammals. We'll use dogfish shark, mud puppy, and cat as specimen. In the cartilage fish, the dogfish shark, the pectoral girdle consists of a U-shaped endoskeletal cartilaginous inverted arch, with its end extending dorsally, and it consists of endoskeletal structures to which secondary dermal components are added as the result of ossification of dermal elements. And in mud puppy, The pectoral girdle, the shoulder, is part of a appendicular skeleton and consists of the coracoid cartilage and the scapula posteriorly. Lastly, in the cat, the pectoral girdle as well as the shoulder is part of also the appendicular skeleton, but consists of the clavicle and scapula also posteriorly.
Hello, my name is Hayden Simpson, and next we will be talking about the pelvic girdle of the shark, the mud puppy, and a cat, and how they compare to each other. So first we're going to talk about the pelvic girdle in sharks. They help move the pelvic fins, which help balance the fish, keep it level, and prevent it from rolling from side to side. The pelvic girdle of sharks consists of a cartilaginous structure called the pubal ischial bar. It's on the figure above. It connects the two inverse projections of the sharks. It also has an iliac process at the end of the pubosciatic bar. The iliac processes connect with the metapterygium via the protopterygium, which the metapterygium and protopterygium's function is to support the fin of the shark. The metapterygium then connects to the radial pterygiophores, which then make up the fin, allowing for it to move, which helps keeps the shark balanced. Next, I will be talking about the pelvic girdle in tetrapods, and they consist of some paired elements. Two different sides, two equal sides. It has three different parts of the hip. This thing called the pubis, the ischium, and ilium, as you can see on the figure above. The shark did not have this. They just had the ilium with their iliac processes. The pubis, ischium, and ilium are actually made up of calcified cartilage, which is the same as in the shark, and unlike the cat. Between the pubis, ischium, and ilium connect to the acetabulum, which connects to the femur of the mud puppy, which allows for lower body movement of the animal, which is important because it doesn't just swim in water. Without this pelvic girdle, it wouldn't be able to move its lower half of its body and would just drag itself on land, kind of like the first tetrapods, like a tiktaalik, I guess, because it didn't really have well-developed lower body. And then, finally, the pelvic girdle of the cat is like the mud puppy, and unlike the shark, because it contains a pelvic girdle containing an ilium, an ischium, and pubis. Like I mentioned, the shark did not seem like it only had an ilium for its iliac process. However, in mammals, like the cat, the pelvic girdle consists of a complex bone figure called the os coxae. The os coxae is a elongated, complex, featuring, like I mentioned, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Mammals have been reoriented the ilium to kind of fit their way of walking. The ilium is articulated with the sacrum, so that vertebrae on those mammals. The dorsal edge of this is called the crest, as you see there. The posterior part of the os coxae, or the coxal bone, consists of the ischium and the ilium. The paired halves of the pubis and the ischium meet in the middle to form the pubic symphysis and the ischiatic symphysis. And the oval opening in the os coxae is a foramen called the obturator foramen. And like the purpose of the mud puppy, the purpose is so it can connect to its femur, which will allow for lower body movement, when the cat, which will allow it to move around and jump and whatnot. Finally, we will talk about the importance of fins and limbs to the tiktaalik. First off, tiktaalik is described as a transitional vertebrate between fish and vertebrae, and tetrapods, Tiktaaliks help highlight why fish would want to transition to land. The tiktaalik is or I would say it has fins, scales, and gills like a fish. However, it has wrist bones, a neck, and shoulders like a tetrapod. It truly is kind of a middle child between fish and tetrapods for this reason. The reason that fins and limb evolution is important to Tiktaalik is because fins transition from balancing and steering in a fish to the fins of fishes became the support of land-dwelling animals. We studied the changes in the pectoral girdle and how the bones of the fin became less morphed together and more elongated so it could use itself to walk on land. We look at limbs to see what changed from the fish as to what was found in the Tiktaalik, to see what changed from the Tiktaalik to the first tetrapods. Overall, the study of fins and limbs help us find out what happened millions of years ago and help us plot out what changes happened when.